My name's Brennan Sketch Probst. I play for the Chicago Salmon. I've played for them for the last 2 seasons. I'm excited for our 3rd season to be starting soon. When I'm not playing baseball, I am teaching at Carthage College in Kenosha. I teach the darkroom and the digital photography classes over there. And I'm the main photographer right now for the Chicago Salmon. So today I just want to, it's kind of going to be like a 2-part presentation. The first part is I'm going to be giving a short history of photography and how it was used in the 19th century, and then also the second half is going to be how I make pictures at baseball games. So let's go ahead and get started. So 1839, I kind of find it funny that both photography and baseball were said to have begun in 1839. Now, we know that's not especially true, right? Abner Doubleday probably never touched a baseball in his life. This photograph has obviously been doctored. And like baseball, photography's roots go back much further than 1839. And so, for the next few slides, there's not going to be any baseball. But I promise we're going to get back to baseball. I'm just giving you a little bit of historical context before we start talking about baseball. So, to photograph baseball, we use what? We use a camera, right? Camera has been shortened from the term camera obscura, which literally translates to dark chamber. For thousands of years, people have known that if you are in a darkened room and there's a small opening on one side of that room, the light from outside will come through and make a projection on the opposite wall of the world that's outside. It will be upside down and flipped, but it will be a perfect projection of that outside world. And so scientists have known about the camera obscura phenomenon for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It was used as a drawing aid hundreds of years ago to get correct proportions. You can just imagine how bad this camera would smell with a bunch of sweaty dudes drawing in there. But so they would have like a screen that the light would get projected on. And of course you can see it's upside down and reversed, but they would trace off of that screen so that they would get correct perspective. And over time, this camera obscura device got a little more sophisticated as the years went by. So we can see here that they have added a mirror to flip the image so it's no longer upside down, and then they use a lens to brighten the image. And so over time, that camera got smaller and smaller so that it was no longer a full-sized room that you had to sit in, but rather a small device that you could set up, and like this gentleman is right here, you can trace right off of. And this kind of looks similar to a camera that we are familiar with today. So the light would come in through the lens, project off the mirror, and then you just trace it off a sheet of glass onto tracing paper. So this is what one of those looked like in the 1700s, the camera obscura. So we knew how cameras worked, we knew how to make images, we just didn't know how to make those images permanent. So that all changed when French inventor Joseph Nicéphore Niepce came around. He created the heliograph in the early 1820s. And so he discovered that bitumen, which is a kind of asphalt, was light sensitive. And so he would coat a glass plate with this bitumen, and then he would fix the image in a mixture of oil of lavender and white petroleum. So this is what the world's first photograph looked like. And this was made sometime between 1824 and 1826. So this is a view of Nicéphore Niepce's, the view outside of his summer home in France. And it's really kind of hard to tell what's even going on. But here is an enhancement of that image. This is like the sun hitting the roof on the house next door. We got some other buildings around here. So that is the world's first photograph. It's actually on display at the University of Texas. You can go see it if you want. They keep it behind this velvet curtain that you have to lift up. It's kind of a magical experience, I've heard, because it's still a little bit sensitive to light. So exposure times were very slow for this process. This image was said to have taken anywhere between 8 hours and 2 days. 8 pipes.
Hi.
This image was said to take anywhere between 8 hours and 2 days for the image to form completely. But so, unfortunately, Nicéphore Niepce, before he was able to kind of perfect his process, he passed away, and his partner, Louis Daguerre, took over and kind of kept working on the process. And in 1839, he came out with what he calls the daguerreotype process, named after himself. So that's why a lot of people think photography began in 1839. That's when the first publicly available process became available. And so the daguerreotype, they were always a direct positive image. So there was no negative involved. Maybe you remember photography 20, 30 years ago, we always used negatives, right? So there was no negative involved in the daguerreotype process. It was a direct positive. So there was no way to make copies, no easy way to make copies of that image. It was one of a kind. Each one was a one of a kind image, and they're typically very precious. And exposure times, he got the exposure times down. It didn't take 2 days anymore. But if you're in direct sunlight, an exposure would take about a minute. If you're in indirect sunlight shade, it could take 15 minutes to 30 minutes to make an image appear. This is what a daguerreotype camera looked like. Here we have the shutter. That would you just flip it open to start the exposure, and flip it closed to end the exposure. The back end would slide in and out to adjust the focus, and then you put the sensitized plate in the back there. So now we're getting back to baseball. I promised we would. This is a daguerreotype of the Knickerbocker Baseball Club, which is, as you all probably know, was one of the very first baseball clubs. This was made in 1846. Love their hats, love their suits. And you can see most of them are pretty sharp, except for this gentleman in the top right, who, a little bit blurry, he moved a little bit during the exposure. Here we have another photograph of a young kid holding a lemon peel baseball. This might be the first photograph to feature a baseball in the image. And so daguerreotypes were often kept, they were usually very small, and they were very fragile. So they were kept in these velvet cases under glass. Here we have a daguerreotype of Alexander Cartwright, one of the founders of the New York Knickerbockers. I think he's on the left, I'm not positive. So here we have an illustration of what a daguerreotype studio may have looked like in the mid-1800s. So here we have our subject here getting his image made. Here are the cameras they have set up here. We didn't have tripods yet. We didn't have any sort of flash as well, or like battery-powered lights yet. So all the photo studios back in those days were usually on the top floor of like a tall building. So here we have a skylight that's letting in all this light onto this guy. Got a little shade so it doesn't get too hot. Yeah, like I said, the cameras. And then back here would be the dark room where they would prepare the plates and then come up with the finished images. And then here we have a guy, he's polishing a plate to be sensitized. And then over here, daguerreotypes are very small and very, very detailed, and they're often examined. You could examine them as closely as you wanted, and they'd still be very sharp. So here we have a couple people with magnifying glasses looking at their final daguerreotype images. And so if you look really close, you can see there's a device behind this guy's head. Because daguerreotypes took so long to expose, if you move just a little bit, like we saw in that Knickerbocker picture, you would end up blurred, right? So what they had were these special chairs or stools that you would sit on, and there would be this clamp that would tightly hold the back of your neck so you couldn't move at all, even if you wanted to. And then if you stood up, there'd be a second clamp around your waist to keep you steady. And there on the left is a picture of an actual chair with a clamp that was used in the 1800s. And here we have a funny little illustration of, this is called the daguerreotypist, of this guy, the photo assistant trying to shove the clamp under the back of this guy's neck, and he's not too happy about it. I just love the pose of this daguerreotype guy too. He's That's how I look all the time with the games, taking pictures. So the next major step in photography was the invention of the wet plate collodion process. So this used negatives instead of direct positives. So it used glass plate negatives that could then be printed as many times as you wanted, so you can make as many copies as you wanted. And the positives were typically called albumin prints, which were, it was paper sensitized with a mixture of silver nitrate, salt, and egg whites. Here's an example of what one of those negatives would have looked like. They were very fragile because they're on glass, right? But they were very sharp and very detailed, just like the daguerreotypes. Something that was popular starting in the mid-1800s were visiting cards, or cards they visit. They were popularized in France. They were cards that were, they were albumin prints that were printed on cardstock and then traded around between friends. And so this here is the Brooklyn Atlantic's, their own carte de visite, and it's commonly known as maybe being the very first baseball card ever made. Here we have another albumin print of the very first professional baseball team, right? The Cincinnati Red Stockings in 1869. And here we have an outdoor photograph of the Knickerbocker Club before or after playing against the Excelsior Baseball Club in 1859. And what's so cool about this photograph is it's made outside. Because what I didn't tell you about the wet collodion process is that the negatives, you had to coat the negative, you had to coat the plate, the glass plate, and you had to make the photograph before it dried. So you had a very short time to expose the plate after you coated it. So it was very rare to get photographs out in the field in these days. So this guy who took this photograph, he probably had some kind of traveling darkroom or something like that. Here we have a photograph from the Civil War. Union troops posed with baseball equipment. You can see here where they have some bats. And then if you look very closely, you can see a few of them are holding some lemon peel baseballs. And so here are a couple of examples of what mobile darkrooms would have looked like back in those days. Like I said, you had to pretty much have your darkroom on location to make the photograph, because you had to expose it before it dried. So here on the left is Roger Fenton's photographic van that he used to photograph the Crimean War. And then on the right is Matthew Brady's photographic darkroom wagon that he used to make pictures during the Civil War. And none of the soldiers really knew what it was that he was doing with this wagon. So they all referred to it as the what is it, or the what's it wagon. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the term tintype. We have a player on our team named Tintype. Tintype is a type of wet collodion print, but instead of on glass, it is made on a black lacquered iron plate. There's actually no tintype involved. There's actually no tin involved in the tintype process. In fact, it's officially referred to as the ferrotype, because iron is ferrous, right? And so you coat a black lacquered iron plate, and then when you intentionally underexpose the image, it gives the illusion of a positive image for the final result. And like daguerreotypes, it's a positive only process. There's no negative involved, so you can't make copies of these. But it was a very kind of quick process, because it didn't require a negative and then a positive. And so even beyond when these things were used by professional photographers, they were still used at like carnivals and that kind of thing up until the turn of the century, because they were kind of like very quick to make. Here we have an example of a full plate tintype. So a full plate tintype would have been about 8 by 10 in size, but most tintypes were quite small, usually around the side of a playing card or that kind of size. And so you might notice that a lot of these players depicted have their bat in their left hand. That's because since it is a positive print, no negative involved, it's actually reversed. So every tintype that you see is actually a reversed image of what was actually there. You can see in this example, this guy's uniform lettering is reversed. Oftentimes they tried in vain sometimes to hand color their tintypes. Sometimes it looked good, sometimes it didn't look so great, like in the example on the right. And so because these had to be made while the plate was still wet, they were limited to where they could make the photograph, like I've been saying. So a lot of times they had to use studios that didn't really scream baseball. We have these baseball players sitting on maybe a piano or something. We have them in a romantic forest. Is that a harp? I'm not really even sure what that is. But so
you gotta look into getting that kind of heifer, you know.
So the next major invention was the dry plate, which was a wet plate, except it didn't need to be wet to make a proper exposure. So this allowed photographers to get out of the studio and make photographs in more remote places, shoot more on locations. And also the exposure times were much shorter. Instead of like a minute, exposure times are now probably a little bit less than a second. But that still wasn't fast enough to capture fast-moving action. So here we have the Philadelphia Baseball Club on their home field, made in 1884. You can see that we no longer required the clamps, right? So people don't look quite so rigid in these photographs, but they still aren't like actually playing. Like you can tell these photographs are posed, but they were actually able to go onto a baseball field now and pose. You can see that they kind of make it seem like they're playing, but they're obviously not, because like this guy's not even looking at what's going on. And also the photographer would have been like right in front of the mound, which wouldn't really be conducive to playing, would it?
These don't look reversed. Are these reversed pictures?
No, sorry, I should have said, so these are made on glass plates, like the wet plate. They weren't made on the lacquered iron. So these were negative to positive, negative positive process. So no, they're not reversed. I love this one. He's really selling it. But still, it was, cameras were still very bulky and huge at that point in time, so it was difficult to get the camera onto the baseball field. So a lot of photographs were still made in the studio. And so these are examples of kind of like early baseball cards, albumin print baseball cards. You can see he's sliding into home in somebody's living room on the right here. And I'm about to get to my absolute favorite, which is they would actually have baseballs tied to strings because they couldn't, the exposure times were so slow they couldn't catch the action of the baseball in the air, so they would just hang it by a string in the studio. You can really kind of see it in this one, the string hanging off of that guy. But at least on that one they had like a fake baseball background, unlike most of the living room and piano sets that they had going on.
And he had those sexy legs going on too.
Sexy legs. Yeah, those socks or those his legs, I'm not sure. Here you can see they didn't even bother to change the location of the ball. It's in the same spot for fielding and batting. And you can see this one, we're back in like a jungle or something. Here, this one, they didn't change the spot between 4 and we're back in the living room with some like torn up carpet in each one. This one, they didn't even bother to hang a baseball, they just scratched it into the negative. They just drew the baseball and had him like looking at nothing. So it really wasn't until the turn of the century, the 20th century, when we actually started to get photographs on the field of actual baseball being played. This is one of the earliest examples from Gainesville, Florida. And here we have, I thought this was Brennan, the Cubs playing the Tigers in the 1908 World Series. Here we have examples of what cameras looked like around then. So you can see they're still very, very large, very bulky, very hard to handle. So it took a lot of skill and a lot of preparation to get amazing photographs like this one. It really makes you appreciate photographs like this. Ty Cobb sliding into third base in 1910.
So what on that photo? What would that have been? What was the medium there? Was that?
Yeah, that would have been an albumin print. That would have been a glass plate. Mm-hmm.
The glass plates, because there's not a negative. Is it because you're looking opposite the side that the image has been made?
So the glass plate is the negative. So you make the negative and it's formed on the glass plate, and from that glass plate negative you make the positive prints.
Okay.
With the ferrotypes, the tin types, it's the same process, but you have a black backing, and so it makes it look like a positive print.
Okay.
Yeah, you really kind of have to see one to appreciate it, but that's how it works. So you can see there's a big difference between photographing the actual baseball action versus the posed, as funny as it is and charming. So, so now I'm going to start talking about my baseball photography. And as you can see from our history, we now realize that this kind of photography would have been absolutely impossible, capturing action like this. And I promise you this baseball is not hung on a string. But I do feel kind of silly sometimes, fully dressed up and with a big modern camera in my hand. But it is necessary, I think, because making photographs of your baseball club are a lot of positives. So with strong photography, you can savor and share the best moments of your baseball matches. You can also strengthen relationships with other clubs. Whenever we're playing against other teams, I always make sure to photograph them as well, which can help strengthen bonds between teams. You can also make your club's website look more professional with good photography. My wife, Jack, is going to talk more about websites in her presentation. You can also create engaging social media posts with your photographs. Here we have Pipes. I think you commented on this one. You said actually looks a little more like a confused golfer.
Yeah, I'm always picking on the professor.
And you can just overall more effectively promote vintage baseball. Katie and I, we do a newsletter after. Oh yeah, you can sign up to be on our newsletter, and Katie will go more into that during her presentation. But we put out a newsletter after each game where we recap the game and we include photographs of each game. So, the recommended equipment. This is my equipment on the left. I'm kind of a camera geek. You don't have to go as overboard as I do. But I do recommend using some kind of digital SLR or mirrorless interchangeable lens camera because a phone just doesn't get close enough to the action. I also recommend some kind of telephoto zoom lens so that you can get close up to what's going on. And then some kind of image editing software. I personally love using Adobe Lightroom. It's really good for editing and for organizing your photographs. So I typically carry 3 cameras with me to each game. Like I said, you don't have to do that. 1 camera's fine. But I'll have 1 camera with a long lens, like a super long lens for capturing fielding. Then I'll have one with a sort of long lens for capturing batting. Then I'll have kind of a more smaller, wide-angle lens camera for capturing stuff on the sidelines.
When do you play?
Yeah, I know, right? I am much better making photographs than I am at playing. I'll say that. I try my best in the outfield, but yeah, I'm more confident in my photography skills than I am in my baseball playing skills. So I want to kind of go through what makes a strong photograph in my opinion. So I think a good photograph has good exposure, sharpness, image quality, composition, and timing. I want to go into each of those individually. So exposure means how bright or how dark your picture is. So underexposure and overexposure are bad. You want to try and get a photograph that has just the right amount of exposure to create an image that's not too dark or too light. It's called correct exposure. Sharpness, hopefully you can see the difference here. Good sharpness is the result of correct focus and an adequate shutter speed, how fast your camera opens and closes. So you can see here, this may or may not have been made by my wife, because I am actually in the photograph. But so you can see the focus is not on the player, it's on the background. You want the focus to be on the player. You want the player to be nice and sharp. And so when I'm using my camera, I usually put my camera in continuous autofocus mode, so it's constantly hunting for that correct focus point. And then you just have to make sure that you keep your focus point on the subject. This is especially useful when you have subjects like running towards you, like after they've hit the ball. You want your camera to keep hunting for focus. Also, I always use a very fast shutter speed to freeze the action on the field. I usually use a shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second, so that's how fast the shutter is actually open for, is 1/1000th of a second. So that's how I get those nice, sharp images of fast-moving objects. Image quality, this is one that I see a lot, where people just crop way too far into their photographs. That's why I think it's very important to have a long telephoto lens so you can get close to the action without having to crop. This is an image that I think is too cropped. The image quality is a little bit worse than I would have liked, but the image was too good for me not to keep. So here's an example of not really cropping much at all, and then hopefully you can see the difference between these two. This one I cropped in like a lot, and so you usually don't want to do that because your image quality degrades. That's why I recommend using like an actual camera versus a phone, because with a phone, the angle of view is very wide, so you do have to crop way in if you want to get images like that. So composition. Typically speaking, the photograph needs some kind of focal point. Focal point is the main point of focus or interest, otherwise known as the subject of the photograph. So that focal point captures the viewer's attention, gives their eye a place to settle. So in this photograph, Razor trying to Cleveland chop, or is it Cleveland chop? I can't remember. Boston chop. He's trying to bunt, but he is the focal point of that photograph. So without a focal point, here is a photograph. I just pulled this randomly from the internet. Hopefully none of you took it. But without a focal point, it's kind of you kind of lose interest. You're not really sure what you're supposed to be looking at. Everyone's backs are turned to the camera. There's no like one subject. So I like for there to be a clear subject in my photographs. I like them to be somewhat prominent in the frame facing the camera. Also, I like to try to avoid busy, distracting backgrounds that have things that are not appropriate for our time period. Like I try to keep cars out of the background of the photograph. Here we can see this guy in his cargo shorts kind of got in the way of this photograph of Barber diving for the ball, which I think is an otherwise pretty good photograph. Here we have a large red canopy, which is distracting.
In the baby buggy.
And the baby buggy, a little bit anachronistic as well. So, I mean, sometimes there's nothing you can do, but when I can, I like to avoid busy backgrounds. And then timing. So correct timing is pretty crucial. When I'm photographing people batting, I really want that photograph of the ball just getting smushed on that bat. I love it. It's really hard to get. You can also get pretty good shots of like your left and center fielders. Here we have two plays with two different results.
Yeah,
during the
Aaron
scene.
missed it, huh?
It's a rare miss by Aaron, yeah.
Yes.
Mhm. And I also like to stand here to capture base running as well. Lawman looking good in his kilt. Oh yeah, and it's also a good positioning for catchers. But yeah, I kind of fall in the crux of just standing in those two places, typically because I don't have a lot of time to get set up because I'm playing as well. So if you have a lot of time, definitely play around with more camera angles than just those two. Sometimes it's fun to stand right behind the plate, get epic pictures of people pitching the ball. But yeah, sometimes I am not able to capture as many photographs as I want. That's kind of a problem when you're also playing, right? And sometimes if you're batting right before, right after me, I don't get to photograph you as well. So, as a photographer, I find it as my responsibility, my mission to tell the story of each match through a series of photographs. So these following are a few tips I have on how to tell a story of each match. So I like to have a lot of variety in my photographs. I don't want to just stick to hitting or pitching for the whole time. I want to capture all the action that's happening on the field. Batting, fielding, running, catching, everything. And I also want to make sure that I include everybody on the team. That's important for me, that everyone gets included equally. So yeah, don't be afraid to try a lot of different compositions, a lot of different angles. And I also like to photograph people up close like you've been seeing, but also having some wider angle shots can be nice to see the venue that you're playing at, kind of adding some more context to your photographs. I love Dizzy's pose here in the background with his hands on his hips. And here we have the beautiful skyline when we played in Indianapolis. And then I always try in my photographs to have some kind of emotion being shown or like a reaction to something happening. Whether that be like kind of like a sense of awe of one of Razor's well-hit balls, one of the best hitters on our team, or some feelings of frustration after a pop-up or a strikeout. Barber is my absolute favorite player to photograph because he has the very best facial expressions, no matter what he's doing. Yeah, no, he's gold every time.
Does he know you're showing this? Or?
He's not here. No, I always tag everybody, and I always,
Yes, after the games, we get tagged a Facebook thing where he puts a bunch of, and all of mine come to me and I see all the photos I was in for that day, and it's really, really fun, and it's really exciting. It's like the highlight of the afternoon.
Thank you. But yeah, I mean, I do include some funny shots here and there, but I do try and make everyone look their best, and if someone doesn't like the way that they're represented, then I'll delete the photo, of course. And then I also try and get photographs of interaction between players, because we're kind of trying to promote friendship between clubs, and also it's kind of a wider angle, so you can see more of the play that's happening on the field, more of the chaotic energy, ducking. Oh, I love this one with Pipes. Pipes loves to get down and dirty, crawling around. It's not a baseball game until Pipes has crawled around on the ground a few times. Here he is tagging some guy out at third base. I'm pretty sure he got him.
Oh, I got him. I know I got him. Yeah.
Razor running the third, ball being thrown. I kind of wish his hand wasn't blocking this guy, but what are you gonna do?
I think that's me.
No, that's someone on the Grinders. But yeah, they're taking after you. Yeah, that's a Grinders player throwing the ball to third, so he's trying to get him out. Nichols being run down by the Prairie Chickens, who are way too good. And Flapjack always has great conversations and interactions with people when she's tending second base, which I usually try and capture. There's another one of Barbara being goofy. And so when you're making photographs, don't forget the sidelines. That's where a lot of the camaraderie and conversations happen on the field. Here we have some of the fun action we had on the side of the field during our Indianapolis game. I think it was about 110 degrees that day.
And that was the only shade for the whole
we,
team.
we were sitting on the edge of a parking lot in this one scrawny little tree, all huddled together, trying to get this little bit of shade. And you can just see how hot and sweaty everybody was. So that kind of tells the story of that game in a single image. And here on the right we have Flapjack. She actually held a parasol out when she was on second base out on the field because it was so hot out there. And I always try and get moments where we're not playing. Pipes always does his 7th inning stretch song. What's it called again?
The Who's That Song?
What?
The Who's That Song?
Yeah.
Or we call it the Salmon Song. I don't know
Salmon
if there's really has a name.
So I capture moments like that, or when we have to line up and we're introducing the teams, I try and include that as well. I usually I'm not able to grab those photos because I'm in the line. And of course, you can't forget about the umpires who put a lot of effort into into calling the matches and make sure they get included as well when they're there. And it's always a better game when there's an umpire. It's always a lot more fun. And I basically try and capture anyone who's dressed up for the occasion. Flapjack's mom got dressed up in the top left, or if there's any tally keepers who are dressed up, and of course Boss Lady looking wonderful as always. And here's just a couple other ways I've used my photography for the club. Right now I'm trying to make a series of baseball cards using the cyanotype process, which is another 1800s photographic process where they're all blue, of course, but it's using this cool process from the 1800s. So I'm trying to make the baseball cards kind of historically accurate in that regard by using this old process. So we're going to see how that goes. Once my semester's over and I have more free time, I'm going to play around with that more. And then I've also done a series of portraits for all the players on the team. I had a little impromptu show during one of our last home game last season, where I hung up all the portraits and everyone got to see them, and then I gave them as gifts to all the players on the team. And they're each about 7 inches square. And these also serve as the photographs on our roster page on the website. So that is my presentation. Thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you.
Yes, and let me know if you have any questions at all.
I got one.
Yeah.
So with a lot of teams around here playing like 1850s, 1860s era, 1850s, 1860s rules. In a perfect world setting, what type of image capturing would have been used?
So it would have used the wet plate process, probably. Coating the glass plates and then making positives from those prints. I'm trying to figure out, I've done a little bit of experimenting with making my own tintypes. I think it'd be really cool, maybe by the end of this season or next season, if we could get like a tintype group photo made. I think that'd be really cool.
So it would have been tintyping.
Tintype or wet plate, yeah, it would have been 1850s.
Does media pick up your pictures? Like any see your stuff and use them and promote?
If they haven't contacted me about it. I know some of my photography has been used in the VBBA newsletter. Besides that, I don't think so. No, it's mostly just been for social media use. And for helping with my drawings, because I use my photographs as references for the drawings as well. And that's why I'm called Sketch, because I like to draw. Just throwing that out there.
Thought because you were a sketchy guy.
Well, that too. That's what it says on the roster.
Oh, right.
Is he an artist or was it a suspicious character? Right. Any other questions? Okay. Well, that's my presentation. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for the effort of putting that together. Very good.
where the digital sign up is right. But you don't have.
I have a question about your song. So you do it in the seventh inning?
Well, we do it in the middle of the seventh inning, but sometimes we do it before the game. And if we have a round robin or, multiple games, we'll do it between those.
You have